I think when we were given the revelation, we are not supposed to just regurgitate it out into the public. We're supposed to do business with it, enhance its value. What I want is for the Urantia book to become mainstream literature, and especially to have a seat at the tables where questions of life, reality, and the origin of existence are discussed. So my framing question today is, why should the Urantia book have a seat at scientific tables? Well, for one, science studies only the material universe, seeking only the how. Science seeks to answer the most important questions about existence by examining only those things that can be proven by empirical evidence, which at best only gives us the how. But science leaves out entire categories that can explain the why. It expressly excludes studies such as religion and metaphysics and even philosophy. Anything that would add meaning or explain why things exist or why they operate the way they do. And the outcome is predictable. Science is putting together a puzzle with central pieces missing. And as a result, in my opinion, the explanations remain incomplete. And so I believe those missing pieces are found in the Urantia book. The Urantia book embeds motives and purposes and trajectories, which are the pieces that science cannot measure, but still needs to develop a coherent model. So for me, the Urantia book contributes the why to scientific inquiry. So how can we get the scientific community to recognize the value of the Urantia book? Well, my answer was to write a book that not only demonstrates that value to the scientific community, but to the world at large. And I wrote that book. In fact, I wrote 3 books, and I call them the Divine Adventure Trilogy. Book 1 is The Divine Adventure, Why We Exist. Book 2 is The Divine Adventure, Time and Eternity. And book 3 is The Divine Adventure, The Uncaused Cause. These books show how the Urantia book's unique concepts provide the missing links that tie together seemingly unrelated scientific theories and unlock fruitful lines of reasoning, not by asserting answers, but by offering conceptual structures that make sense of the paradoxes that science is currently struggling with. And these books accomplish that not by resorting to theology or dogma or religious doctrine, but simply rely on logic and reason. So today I want to share these 3 books with you, how I developed them and how they demonstrate the value of the Urantia book to scientific inquiry, ultimately, in my opinion, earning a seat at the table. So first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I found the Urantia book in 1997, and I was immediately impressed. I had a very strong sense that this was authentic and true. And the more I read it, the more convinced I was that this book is what the world needs. It has to become widely known. Now, at that point in my life, I was a Christian evangelist. I'd been being a Christian evangelist for about 20 years. And so naturally, my inclination was to find a way to spread the Urantia book and its teachings to others. So in 2011, I launched an online ministry that blended Urantia book concepts with traditional Christian theology. And together with my partners, we introduced thousands of new readers to the Urantia book. And it was during this time that I came across many atheists. Most of them were once devoutly religious, but they had completely abandoned their faith. And I was very interested in what could happen to cause such a dramatic shift. And so I inquired. Almost invariably, they told me the same thing: science and evolution. To them, science proves there's no God and that we are just a great cosmic accident. And I listened to their arguments, but I wasn't persuaded. I felt that all of their arguments were weak and incomplete. And being the evangelist that I am, I wanted to change their minds and help them recapture their faith. But I realized that I can't do that by relying on theology alone. If I was going to be persuasive at all, I had to use an acceptable authority, and the Bible and religious doctrine is just not acceptable authorities to atheists. The only authorities they would accept are logic and reason and science. And I also realized that I couldn't begin in the middle of the story, so to speak, by debating isolated atheist claims. I had to address the greater assumptions that lie beneath. And so I knew I had to start at the beginning, the true beginning, what I call the beginning of existence, because that's the moment where religion versus atheism, where that debate begins. So I asked myself a foundational question. If God is wholly self-contained and complete, why create anything? What possible motive could exist? I knew that if I could answer that question, I believe I could resolve the entire atheism-theism debate at its root. And that was the launching point of my first book, The Divine Adventure, Why We Exist. Now, I spent months scouring the Urantia book to see if there were clues, not just how creation occurred, but why. Why create it all? And the Urantia papers, as you know, provide the mechanism of creation, but not the motive. And then I came across this passage in paper 19, chapter 6 on the Havona natives. Ascending mortals in their long and loving association with Havona natives do much to compensate for the spiritual impoverishment of the earlier stages of mortal progression. At the same time, through their contacts with ascending pilgrims, the Havonas gain an experience which to no small extent overcomes the experiential handicap of having always lived a life of divine perfection. So that phrase got me, the experimental handicap. What it's saying is that although Havona natives are perfect, they have never known imperfection, struggle, or failure, and therefore they lack the experiential growth that mortals gain through trial and error. In other words, Havona natives have never experienced the thrill of victory because they have never experienced the agony of defeat. And I realized that that also applies to God. God has never experienced the thrill of victory because God has never experienced the agony of defeat. And to me, that was the answer to my question as to why God created. I concluded that what God knows existentially, he seeks to know experientially. And I concluded that creation is God's adventure in self-knowing, and that's what I call the divine adventure. Now, I wanted to clearly articulate this new realization, so I began writing. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not express it well enough. So for about a year, I struggled trying to write this book. And then a friend of mine who teaches AI, Gabriel Rimberg, whom I'm sure you know, he suggested using AI. And I thought, yeah, I could use AI not to get my answers, but to serve as a thinking partner to help me flesh out my theory. So I sat down on my computer, I opened an AI program, and I asked this question. I said, I want to write a book on why God created. I have a theory, but before I tell you my theory, I want you to search your database and all the knowledge that you have access to and tell me all the reasons why people think God created. I thought maybe someone else may have come up with this idea and it wasn't quite as novel or original as I thought. And AI came up with the usual motives: love, companionship, creative expression, glory, but they all felt insufficient to me. They all centered on needs that I don't believe God has. I don't see those things as primary motives. Secondarily, sure, God wants to share love and promote companionship, etc. But that wouldn't be his primary motive. To me, the motive to create would be something internal, something that God wants for himself. So I explained to AI the experiential handicap and my theory that God wants to experience himself. And what followed was this incredible conversation that fully articulated this framework of why God created and how existence itself makes sense when viewed through Urantia book concepts. And at the end of the discussion, I asked AI what it thought of my conclusion. And this was his assessment. It said it was the most coherent and comprehensive explanation it had ever encountered, and that nothing in its training database resembled it. And then they asked me, am I ready now to write my book, now that I've fleshed it all out? And I said, no. I said, rather than writing this book, I want to publish this conversation. I want readers to experience the process of discovery in the same way that AI did, and not just read my conclusions. And so I published the first book, which became The Divine Adventure, Why We Exist. Now, I think that this book matters to science because its central insight, which is that experience may be the purpose of existence, it unexpectedly speaks to one of today's most pressing scientific and technological challenges, which is alignment. Alignment is what occurs when different beings or systems or intelligences naturally work together because they share a common or clear purpose. So that when existence has purpose, alignment naturally follows. Much of modern science and technology, particularly in the area of AI, is now grappling with the issue of alignment. They ask, how can we ensure that increasingly capable systems pursue goals that remain compatible with human well-being? So book one offers a framework that shows that alignment is not ultimately a control problem, where we have to find ways to control AI, but that alignment is a purpose problem, where the objective is to focus AI on serving experience and enhancing human growth rather than competing with us. Now, I'm a layperson. I don't propose any technical solutions here. That's a bit beyond my expertise. But what book one offers is a new way of thinking about the problem of alignment that might lead to a real solution. Okay, let's consider book two, which is The Divine Adventure, Time and Eternity. Now, after writing book one, I faced another question, which was, if God is eternal, then when did he decide to create? We know the universe has an observable age, but eternity has no beginning. So how can we reconcile an eternal creator with a temporal creation? So again, I searched the Urantia book for an answer. I didn't find a direct answer, but what I found was something just as important, a pattern. And I realized that creation is not a moment, it's a process. That creation is not what deity did, it is what deity is. And that creation is the way that deity unfolds itself. And it has been unfolding throughout the eternal past and will continue to unfold throughout the eternal future. Creation is simply deity being deity. So that answered my question philosophically, but I wanted to test the logic. So as I did with book one, I went back to AI, not to tell me the answer, but to pressure test my reasoning. So what I did is I presented the structure of the universe that's described in paper 12, the universe of universes. And I built my theory on that structure. So what I'm going to show you now is very crude. It is the best that I could do to try to help you visualize what I'm trying to explain here. So in the center of the universe is paradise, which is surrounded by concentric rings. And the innermost ring is Havona, the light blue area here. And it, along with paradise, exists in eternity. So I've sort of lifted it up to let you know that it's not part of the space-time reality. Okay. The next ring is the super universe clusters, which is outside of eternity in time and space. And this is where we are, where we're having our experiences and where we're growing to perfection. And beyond this are the four outer space rings: outer space level 1 in yellow, outer space level 2 in the orangish color, outer space number 3, red, outer space level 4 in burgundy. Okay, and this is the extent of the universe as described in the Urantia book. Technically, it's the extent of the universe. Okay, what was interesting is that AI didn't reject this model. It acknowledged that science can't verify all of these aspects of the universe, but it also recognized that it cannot deny it either. According to AI, there was nothing in contemporary cosmology that contradicts this model of the universe. Okay, so then my question was, what happens when the 7 super universes complete their evolutionary mission and all achieve light and life? And here is where I offer my hypothesis. This is not revelation. It's not in the Urantia book. It's simply a logical extrapolation that is consistent with Urantia book geometry. I propose that when the evolutionary mission for the 7 super universes is complete, the perfected beings all move inward toward paradise. The physical structures that were used for the evolutionary growth move outward, and this triggers a cascading migration through the outer space circuits. So let me just try to explain what you mean. Here's where it gets really crude. Okay. The physical structures of the super universe cluster reorganizes and relocates to a new position beyond the outer space level 4. And it becomes the new outer space level 4. Each of the other outer space levels shift inward one position like concentric gears. And what was the 4th outer space level becomes the 3rd outer space level. What was the 3rd outer space level becomes the 2nd outer space level. What was the 2nd outer space level becomes the 1st outer space level. And what was the 1st outer space level becomes the new super universe circuit. And creation begins anew in this new super universe circuit. Now, that's just my extrapolation. I think I'm doing what the perfecters of wisdom do and the Melchizedeks and the scientists do, which is just speculating, proposing possibilities. And although this sequence is not mentioned in the Urantia book, the pattern echoes something familiar in modern cosmology. Science already accepts several forms of cyclical universe theories. And I just listed a couple of the papers here. A cyclic model of the universe by Paul Steinhardt and Neil Turek. A new kind of cyclic universe by Anna Aegis and Paul Steinhardt. Continual Fascination, the Oscillating Universe in Modern Cosmology by Helge Krah, maybe. And then Cycles of Time, an Extraordinary New View of the Universe by Roger Penrose. Now, my model of a cyclical universe isn't identical to these other theories, but conceptually, we all are aligned in that we all describe a universe that renews itself through structured sequences rather than a one-time event. But where my model goes a little bit further is addressing a question that these scientific theories deliberately set aside, and that is why such cycles would exist at all. Physics can describe how a universe might repeat or reorganize, but it doesn't even attempt to explain the purpose of that repetition. In the Urantia book framework, however, cyclicity is not driven by collapse, but by completion and continued experiential growth. Now, the theory is explained in much more detail in the book, but this is the basic idea. And this parallel is important because it shows that the Urantia book cosmology can produce models that fit comfortably within the range of scientific imagination, and that it can give the scientific speculation the conceptual structure that it often needs to become a coherent model rather than just a mere possibility. So with this cyclical model came some insights. I reasoned that time is the engine of eternity, and that experience is the fuel, and that the experiences of time are what perpetuate eternity. And again, it's speculation, but it fits. And I describe this in a lot more detail in the book. And I further conclude that time is not the origin of creation, time is the medium of experience. And that eternity expresses through time because experience requires sequence. If there's no sequence, there's no growth. If there's no, there's no sequence, no experience. No experience, no growth, no adventure. And without adventure or experience, eternity stands still. And so this framework answers the philosophical question that I had about when God decided to create. And this brings us to what I think is the scientific significance of book 2. And that is that science can measure how time behaves, but it cannot explain why time exists. This concept, based on the cosmology in the Urantia book, reframes the time from being merely a measurement to a purpose. It doesn't override science, but it does add meaning where science currently has none. And it gives scientific minds a new model to explore. Okay, so let's move on to book 3, The Divine Adventure, the Uncaused Cause. Now, this book is a bit different from the other two because it doesn't introduce new theories, it challenges existing ones. It doesn't begin with the assumption that there is a creator. Instead, it analyzes the universe from the position of the atheist, using the very tools that atheists accept, which are logic, reason, and widely accepted scientific models. And it begins at the precise point where atheism and theism first collide, the question of the uncaused cause. Because both atheism and theism generally agree on one point, and that is that something must have always existed for anything to exist at all. So that's where I began with this book. And as with the earlier books, I enlisted AI. Now, again, not for answers, but to pressure test my reasoning. And so I asked AI, does there exist any theory that can explain reality without engaging a creator at all? And to explore this question honestly, I asked AI to adopt the role of the atheist, where I would challenge its theories and it would challenge mine. And the result was revealing. Let me give you a few examples of some of the theories we discussed to show you what I mean. Okay, the first example I'm going to share with you is quantum cosmology and the emergence of consciousness. Quantum cosmology proposes that the universe began from a quantum vacuum. And this vacuum is a structured field of energy and potentials from which everything arose after the Big Bang. Book 3 shows that this concept of a quantum vacuum is strikingly similar to the Urantia book's description of the unqualified absolute, which is the source of all potentials and all subsequent reality. Now, at this stage, the quantum vacuum and the Urantia book concept, they run in parallel. They don't conflict yet. And then we considered the emergence of consciousness. And here's where something new happened. This is where scientific reasoning unexpectedly opens the door to theism. Book 3 explores the emergence of consciousness, how consciousness emerged from the quantum vacuum. And it demonstrates that consciousness can transcend time and space. And therefore, its potential cannot be limited by late-stage physical processes, like a brain. And it can't be reduced to neural activity alone. And as an example, I said, a person in California can think about Jesus, who lived 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem, which is about 7,500 miles away. And by doing so, consciousness effortlessly bridges both time and space. And so this suggests that consciousness operates in a domain not bound by physical space-time, and therefore it must have arisen from the same eternal vacuum from which the physical universe arose prior to the Big Bang. And then Book 3 draws this final parallel. I described to AI the Urantia book's description of the unqualified absolute giving rise to deity absolute. And I said that transaction mirrors the scientific idea of consciousness emerging from the quantum vacuum. And then I asked AI, I said, if consciousness could have emerged from the quantum vacuum, Could God consciousness or creator consciousness have arisen from the quantum vacuum as well? And AI surprisingly said yes. He says that is conceptually possible under this scientific theory of cosmology. So rather than eliminating a creator, the quantum model quietly makes room for God. Okay, let me give you another example that we discussed. Natural selection and the brute fact problem. So natural selection is often described as a blind process, survival of the fittest, trial and error, randomness over time. But book one notes that selection consistently favors the stronger, the more adaptive, and the more thriving. Evolution, let's go here, consistently moves upward. But why? Now, the scientific models don't attempt to answer the question why. They stop at what they call a brute fact, which pretty much means it just is, don't ask why. But book three doesn't shut down that question, and neither does the Urantia book. Book three points to what the Urantia book refers to as divinity, the unifying and coordinating force that permeates all levels of reality. Now, this isn't a religious claim, it's an explanatory necessity to answer the question. Divinity is the reason for the upward pull and for the tendency of reality to move toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. And without the principle of divinity, truth could not be stable, logic could not persist, order could not reasonably emerge, and science itself would lack a rational foundation and collapse. So book three argues that evolution is not merely random and biological, but it's value directed. Natural selection only explains how evolution proceeds, but it doesn't explain why coherence is favored. The explanatory gap here, then, is precisely where the Urantia book contributes structure. So let me share with you a third example. I mean, we talked about so many theories, but another one was the multiverse theory. Now, this one to me was the most surprising because I previously thought that the multiverse theory was just too far-fetched. It was like some kid saying there's a gazillion D universes out there. It just didn't seem, sensible until I thought about the implications of a multiverse theory, and I presented that to AI. The multiverse theory proposes that our universe may be one among many countless universes. And if this is true, then our universe is not the beginning, only a beginning. And then I thought, if there are multiple universes, that means that there could be realms or domains outside of our space-time that operate on different laws of physics. And this theory opened the door to the scientific plausibility of eternal domains that are structured differently from our universe, which makes the Urantia book's description of eternal universes of Havona and Paradise conceptually acceptable. The multiverse theory doesn't prove God exists, but it does dismantle the claims that science forbids the existence of this pre-Big Bang intelligence. But under the multiverse theory itself, God becomes scientifically conceivable. And these are just a few examples in book three. There's so many more that we discuss. It's a very interesting conversation where it shows that the Urantia book aligns with known science and it offers additional ideas that expand scientific perspective and opens new pathways of understanding. So how does book three show the value of the Urantia book to science? Well, to me, it demonstrates how Urantia book cosmology fills conceptual gaps, offers coherent structures where science has none, and provides logical scaffolding for ideas that science already entertains. Book three shows that scientific models often move parallel with Urantia book concepts without contradiction. And it shows that revelation can function as a theoretical engine, much like thought experiments, providing structured ideas that turn scientific possibilities into coherent models. And that alone, the ability to generate fruitful hypotheses, is enough to earn the Urantia book a seat at scientific tables. So, in conclusion, these three books are my attempt to show, not through theology or belief, but through logic, structure, and reasoning, that the Urantia book has genuine value to scientific inquiry. The Urantia book presents itself as a revelation, but revelation is not valuable because it adds new facts. Revelation is valuable because it provides new frameworks, new ways of thinking, new structures to test, and new questions to pursue. True revelation doesn't hand us a finished meal, it opens the pantry. Now, I am not a physicist or a cosmologist, biologist, a scientist of any measure. I'm simply a curious person and a persistent thinker. And yet, even as a layperson, I was able to extract from the Urantia book a coherent model for creation in book 1, a model that resolves the tension between time and eternity in book 2, and conceptual bridges that illuminate the space between science and theism. Now, if I, someone with no scientific training, could uncover concepts that align with, clarify, and extend contemporary scientific models, then imagine what a trained scientific mind could do with the Urantia. Now, science doesn't need to treat the Urantia book as dogma. It simply needs to approach it in the same way it does any other potential source of insight, as a theoretical source, as a collection of untested but testable conceptual frameworks, and as a body of ideas that can be examined, modeled, challenged, refined, and falsified. And that's all I'm asking of the scientific community. Not belief, not acceptance, and not reverence, just engagement. Because once the Urantia book is approached with the intellectual curiosity it deserves rather than religious caution, it no longer has to ask for a seat at the table. It has already earned one. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Zshonette. That was great. I really like the way you used AI. I read an article the other day that, I think a lot of us, me included, at first you're very skeptical. Oh, AI is making us lazy. It's,
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. But I read an article where they were in the business setting. They said about 20 to 30% of the people, AI is really helping them do their job better because they know how to use it. Obviously, but whereas a lot of people, it's just making them lazy, right? It's just garbage in, garbage out sort of a thing. And it's not going anywhere. And we all need to learn how to use it, right? Calculators were going to make all the kids lazy. Now you have to know how to use one. And if you know how to use it well, it makes you a better student. Same thing with computers. AI is going to be the same way. But you really did a nice job, not of just going to AI to get your answer, but, using it helpfully. Otherwise, you would have had to go to the library and read 100 books and take a bunch of notes. And by that time, it's too late.
I absolutely agree with you. I use it a lot in my law practice, but there is an art to using AI. So
Right.
if people want to use it, I would recommend doing a little research on how to use it, because it can give you the wrong answers. It can mislead you because it's not a personality, it's not a consciousness. It really is just
Yeah.
feeding back data. So if you use it properly, it can be very effective.
Yeah, no, I like I mentioned to you, I'm a lawyer too, and I've used it too. And yeah, if you need to find, a quick answer, it might be right. It might not be though. You really have to know. And there are a lot of good classes now, I think, that are coming online teaching people how to use these things. So, if you just want to know a good place to stop for lunch, fine, just ask it. But if you're doing something more complicated,
Yeah.
put the effort in. Okay, let's see. First on my screen is Paul.
As I understand it, what AI really is simply a compilation of human thinking. It's an engine which is farming the entire, worldwide database of human thought back in history. And so what was interesting to me about that was that where you found synergies between your own thinking and what you were getting out of AI, and probably you said this, is that what you're really doing is finding synergies between the Urantia book and human thinking, collective human thinking. And so I think we tend to think of ourselves as UB readers as sometimes outside the mainstream and wondering, what do people think of us as UB readers? And it struck me that you sort of got answers to that question. Thanks.
And I think we have sort of an obligation to tell them what we think, not just sit back and say, well, what are they thinking about us? But give them something to think about, give them something to consider. I'm encouraging engagement on all levels.
Right. Thanks, Paul. Giles or Giles, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yeah, in French you say Gilles, but that's okay.
Gilles, okay, sorry, yes.
No problem. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I find it very interesting. I am myself of a scientific background, though not an astrophysicist. Therefore, all the reading that I did on the Urantia book about the science, this part of the science was above my head. And frankly, I was not really interested. But I had countless discussions when I was a student with atheist students, friends of mine. And of course, I was like on the God side, yeah, God this, God that, and they were like, no, no God, no God, obviously, well, the typical dilemma. And then we talked about science, and I say, well, eventually the fact that I read the Urantia book came up, and I say, okay, well, there is some science astrophysics. Okay, let me read it, right? I say, okay, here's the book. And then a month later, the guy, my friend, came back and said, that's the theory of the 1930s. There are a lot of errors that have been demonstrated. Therefore, all garbage. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And his approach was to say, hey, if I don't find any inconsistency, and if I can find like really truly scientific revelatory information, then I will be convinced. Otherwise, no. So my question is, how do you feel about the revelatory limitations regarding science and about the fact that there are errors, or do you think there are no errors? And how does it impact your work in terms of trying to interact with the scientific communities? Do you see as an impediment or not? What's your take on it?
So this is what I was trying to explain in the presentation, that revelation isn't about giving facts. Facts isn't really the real key of revelation. The key of revelation, in my opinion, is that it gives you new ways of thinking about things. So if we're focusing on the facts, it says this runs at 25,000 miles an hour, whatever the fact is, I'm not a scientist. But if we're relying on the facts and comparing facts, we're not really appreciating the value of this revelation. I think all of us are readers here. We're probably familiar with the parable of the talents, right? Jesus gave, he said the master gave one guy 5 talents, one guy 3, one guy 1. The guy with the 5 and 3, they increased the value. The guy with the 1, he just buried it in the ground and says, here's what you gave me. I'm giving you back exactly what you gave me. And he says, what, you lazy slave, you could have at least put it in the bank and I would have got interest. The point is that when we were given the revelation, we are not supposed to just regurgitate it out into the public. We're supposed to do business with it, enhance its value. And to me, the value, one of the greatest value, is that it changes the way we think about our universe, the way we think about ourselves, and the way we think about our facts. So even, let's say, a fact in the Urantia book is not confirmed by a fact in science. Is there a way that Urantia fact gives us a new way to approach the question or to approach the issue? And I think that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do business with this revelation, not just regurgitate it, not just read it to people, tell people what it says, but it's a revelation. It's supposed to do something to our brains, or the way that we think about life. It is supposed to lift us. And you can't do that kind of progression and advancement by just giving out facts. And so that's the way I would respond to that question, that it isn't, we don't need to focus on the facts. Let's focus on whether that Urantia fact opened the way to look at the problem differently.
Newton didn't have all the answers, but yet he provided a way to think of things that works 90% of the time, and we obviously still value it. We don't go back and say, oh, you missed quantum mechanics, so I'm going to throw out your whole book, right?
And we will never know it all. We will always be progressive. Even the guy who says, well, this is the truth, it's going to not be the truth in about 10, 20 years. But it's about, are we learning new ways to think about these things?
Right. Thanks. Josh.
So in the book, they always talk about, they have conjectures in it too, I've noticed, right? Like the whole way through, they throw in a little, we conjecture, we don't know. On your journey too, you will run into people who disagree. And I feel like we still forget that, right? Like someone puts a theory and it's like quantum mechanics, okay, bows tied, done, right? Where is like what you're saying is more like the process itself, right? So like Big Bang, put a bow on it, done, is like our thinking currently, right? Where you're saying it's like, just take whatever and just do it. Where I think we're used to like submitting to authority all the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, the university said they don't do that. My priest said, my dad said, right?
Isn't that the problem though? Urantia talks about how when we crystallize knowledge, it dies.
So I think like where did you get the impetus to like just do it? You know what I mean? Because we're always suppressed from the top, I feel like.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, let's just try it. Let's just do it. And then look, it's like works out really well, right?
Well, I'll tell you, I came from a very structured religious background. I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It was very structured. This is the truth, and the rest is not the truth. When I began to question that, and I left that group, I said, no more fetters on my thinking. I'm going to find out what's out there. And I do believe in the brilliance of the human mind, the potential of the human being. And I figured I'm just going to go for it. Just open my mind to possibilities. Now I have some discernment. I've fortunately learned through my religious background some guidelines, what is proper, what is good, and that sort of thing. So I'm not open to everything, but I am open to possibilities. And I think that frame of mind is what allows me to see what the Urantia book really offers.
Thanks, Josh. Donald?
Yes, from my experience with working with Zshonette, when something doesn't satisfy her, she's like a bulldog until she gets things settled the way she likes. And when she was doing her first book, Why We Exist, she asked me the question. She says, Don, why did God create? And I said, oh boy. Well, I gave the same pat answers that anyone would give. And so she kept writing, and it took me a long time to get engaged. My mind just wasn't ready to try to jump into this. And then she sent me the manuscript to the book. It just blew me away. And I would say for any of us who struggle with the desire to jump into scientific concepts, she has made this so accessible. I went through all 3 books and I just kept saying, wow. Even after reading the section on divinity, I could never quite wrap my head around what is divinity? How does it really work? And I came across some aha moments in this trilogy that just clarified it for me. I just wanted to give a personal perspective on how it's enabled me, a non-scientifically minded person, to approach these topics. And I feel better able now to engage someone who has a scientific bent of mind to show them the value of the Urantia book. I just wanted to share that.
So that's my ministry partner. I said partner. That could be misunderstood. He's my ministry partner.
Thanks. Thank you, Don. Alfonso?
I'm kind of scared, I was wondering if when I reach the first world, after I die, if there's going to be a test that I have to take, like that I had to know about physics and chemistry and all that scientific stuff, I'm going to flunk. They want to send me back somewhere
Good,
to
because that doesn't
learn,
happen until the
because
Melchizedeks.
all I understood about is divinity, all that, everything, what is divinity and all that. And as far as my experience lately, I've been having more and more depth and what I've been learning from the Urantia book, thanks to all my brothers that write books, and I learn from them too. And lately, I'm just feel, I don't know, that I'm in different stage, that more clarity, more happiness, more joy, more I don't know, like that the revelation is doing something within me, And then it's something I said at this place. I said, let's remember that we all sons of the same God, a loving God. Let's bring forth love. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
You made me think about this idea that I think it's in the Urantia book, maybe the Bible, I'm not sure, that this is a large field under cultivation and let's all pick a spot. Maybe that's my summarization of what Jesus said. But what you're talking about is spreading love as one of the aspects of uplifting our planet. A person with a pure scientific mind might not be moved by just that esoteric theory. So then there's someone else who comes and sits in the scientific spot who's going to address that and bring them back to the Urantia book. There are people who are going to sit in the ecological seat and bring people to the Urantia book. There are people who are going to sit in the, other religions, Catholicism, Hinduism, Judaism, sit in those seats and bring them to the Urantia book. There's so many ways and so many areas that need to be addressed with the Urantia book concepts. And in our ministry, we encourage people, wherever you sit, reach out from that place and bring people to the Urantia book thinking. And like you said, the Urantia book has to not just add knowledge, but it's got to change us in some kind of way. If it hasn't changed us yet, we haven't really got the sense of the revelation, because it's not just a book with information, it's a revelation. There's something different that this book should do to us. And that's what we're looking for.
The book's not out to make us all astronomers or
Right.
cosmologists, but it is there to tell us that, hey, there's a room for all these explanations, and like you said, opening the door. Joy.
First of all, let me just say that you are one smart cookie. I loved your presentation, and you really opened up my mind in a lot of ways. And since you like challenges, there was one problem that I had out of everything you said, and that was from your book 2, where you were putting you thought, well, once we move into the outer space levels, perhaps the super universes will become, where the 4th outer space level is, and they'll all move inward one. Well, I think I have a quote that might sort of challenge that idea, and so I wanted to share it with you.
Sure.
It says, nevertheless, we deem that the perfected super universes will in some way become a part of the paradise ascension careers of those beings who may inhabit these outer creations. It is quite possible that in that future age, we may witness outer spacers approaching Havona through the 7 super universes, administered by God the Supreme, with or without the collaboration of the 7 master spirits. So that, to me, of course, the outer space level, the ultimate level transcends time and space. And so with my finite mind, I'm picturing these outer spacers moving from their outer space levels inward, going through the super universes and learning more about time and space to get to Havona.
Yes.
But, which might just be a total mistake to even think that way. But
No,
that quote to me puts the super universes between Havona and the outer space levels.
Absolutely. And I think in my illustration, what I tried to show, and like I said, I'm just not good at I should have gotten, Gary Tong to help me do this. But the idea is that the super universe level that we live in now would reposition after it's emptied, after we're all out of there, we've done our thing. And the first outer space level moves up into that super universe position. And then creation begins again in that new super universe. So it is a super universe that people are, the outer space people are making their way through. And if you think about it, this is what made me even go down that way of thinking. We're in Urantia, which is on the outer realm of the universe, right? Of the whole super universe. And we've got to go all that way up to paradise. I mean, talk about eons and millennia, right? But when you think of how far the first outer space level is away from there, they got to go through that, plus that space, plus us, the same path. And then the second out, it's just such a long journey inward. Why wouldn't, once the super universe level that we live in is complete, when we're all in light and life, there's no other place to go when we've done that, why wouldn't it move away? Now, my first thought was that it collapses into Havona. Well, technically that couldn't happen because Havonas have no beginning. We had a beginning, so we'll never be Havoners. So I said, well, then maybe it recycles, because if you look at paper 12, where it talks about the structure of the universe, they say, well, we don't know what happened. All we know is about these 4 levels. That doesn't mean is there a 5th? We don't know if there's something more, but when you think of eternity, it can't be the end. That's why I got this idea of a cyclical universe. So you're correct, and I agree with this. Obviously, anything Urantia Book says, I'm going to agree with. But that we go through, that even the outer space people have to go through the super universe life, right?
Yeah.
But they stay in their lane. They ride forward with the rest of us. You know what I'm saying? And they become this new creation. And I thought, the question was, when did God create? Well, there was never a moment when he said, okay, now I shall create. It is, in my conclusion, what deity is. Deity, just the fact that deity exists means there's going to be creation. It's what I do. It's what deity, this is what deity does. It just always creates. And so let's say we have our super universe level and we reach light and life. And then the next group comes up to begin creation anew. I say that everything that we learned, all the experiences, which is what what's the God? Oh my God, I can't remember this. The Supreme Being. What a terrible thought. Okay, the Supreme Being is coming together with all these experiences. It has all the experiences. And so now when creation begins anew in the new super universe circuit, it is informed by everything we learned in that first circuit. So maybe these beings are different. Maybe they're more advanced than we were when we began. Maybe evolution begins at a different spot for them. And then they go through their whole process of light and life, and the Supreme Being absorbs those experiences. And then the second outer space level that now becomes a new superverse level is informed by those experiences. And that's how eternity perpetuates itself. Experiences constantly growing and learning is how eternity keeps going on forever, which is why eternity can be eternal. Because eternity, if it's not growing, if there's nothing new happening, it's standing still. And eternity doesn't stand still. It's got to reach forward, unfold. And so that's where I got the idea. Now, I could be wrong. Like I said, I'm a layperson. Maybe a person with a deeper comprehension of the Urantia book or a deeper understanding of the natural universe may find problems with what I say and may find the real way of explaining it. But I think what I have done is opened the door to a real mind to take it to that level. So I'm not saying that what I am telling you is the truth. I think it's probably a stepping stone to finding out more knowledge, and I think I'm doing what the perfecters of wisdom and the Melchizedeks and the scientists and what they're doing. They're saying we don't really know, but some say this, some say that. Well, Zilly says this, I got my ideas too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. That's a good question. I sort of had the same reaction. And, the book describes it very geographically, right? Very like nice little circles. But I think Zshonette's explanation kind of opens a more qualitative explanation, what's really happening. And maybe it's more like a pot of boiling water than it is like a series of eggshells, right? Like maybe we somehow do sort of expand out through these other levels, and they interact in a way that, whereas the explanation we have now is a little bit simplified, maybe, so we can understand it. So who knows? Yeah, it was really, really intriguing concept. Jerry or Rob or both.
Many nice new concepts. I like that that you've generated, and a new way of looking at AI. I'm with you. The internet first came out, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and I got to get used to AI, I guess. I have a little different way of looking at what creation is, this time space that we are a part of. I see it as just a part of God's creation, not the creation, but just one of many. The purpose of any creation of God's for me is the expansion of deity, to create more deity. And we look at that initially as what we actually have, what we're experiencing at any moment. But everything is potential as well. There's potentials for more types of deity expansion that we're not aware of. This particular one has structure to it, and I think the way it's working is that the personality, granting personality and individual choice, gives us the opportunity to grow new deity experience, deity expansion, as we move towards these various levels, first deifying ourselves to the highest level that we can reach in our status. And then that becomes part of then God the Supreme, on to God the Ultimate, God the Absolute. And I don't think that it needs to be cyclic so more as purposefully expansive, that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At the absolute level, I think you can achieve a point where deity experience in this particular time space has been complete. There's no further effort that can be made to make it any greater. I think it may have other purposes, but even at the ultimate level, they talk of experience that is abstinent, beyond transcending time and space. So I think it's conceptually okay to look at the experiences we have from the multi-universe side as if what if imagine that the database that God has is infinitely expansive. So what if every single experiential choice we made towards deifying ourselves was followed through? Every single one to either side, as multi-universes expand, so that there would be a completion of all deity experiences for me, all experiences possible for deity growth along multi-universe statuses. And the ones that were kept were ones that actually achieved deification, the ones that are divinity status. The ones that were not able to do that did not survive eternal growth. We're told that spiritual growth survives is it survives all kind. It has survival values. Spiritual, non-spiritual growth doesn't survive. I think divinity growth is the same way, and that deity expansion can achieve a finite end. One of the things I look at when I've learned to understand how God works is that he is expansive in levels. We look at time space, initially linear as our lifetimes, then infinite with both past and future things, and then eternal, and then eternity is a completion of the status of divinity expansion for me. I think we can grow up right up to the level where the absolute becomes then the unqualified deity, where we join the purpose of this time space experience of creation reaches a level of where it is part then of the unqualified absolute. It has been completely explored, and other experiences of deity expansion continue to go on beyond that. But the line you draw for how we reach those kinds of conclusions is really fun to look at. It was beautifully presented. Thank you.
Thank you. You've said so much. So let me see if I can let me respond to what I can remember. I took some notes while you were talking. Okay, so first I want to clarify, when you say when we deify ourselves, you're talking about becoming seven safe spirits up in paradise. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
That's just the beginning of it. The beginning of
Okay,
it. We get as far as we can grow. Yeah.
So this is something that came up in my discussion with AI. Creation is just one way of having experiences. There are beings who eventuate, right? They have a whole different way that they are developing experiences for deity, right? We're just in this finite creation realm, right? We have beginnings, even though we may not have ends, we do have beginnings. So we're in the creation realm. I believe that all the outer space levels are also in the space-time level. So they are also part of this finite creation, this finite completion. Then you said, you talked about things getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's why I thought of the cyclical universe, because like I said, if it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, hey, when are you coming to paradise? You know, you're way out there, right? But if it's cyclical, then you have the same journey that the other folks had. Everybody's the same length of journey to make it to paradise, which I think is, fair. You spoke about the multi-universe. Now, the multi-universe theory for me, I'm not saying it's true. Other than, in my book, I say, I can accept the multiverse theory if we're talking about two kinds of universe, eternal universe and the time-space universe. I don't see anything else out there, although could be. But for my, I'm a promoter of the Urantia book. The Urantia book doesn't speak of multiverses other than the eternal universes and the time-space universes. So I'm not sure I have found any kind of, I don't know, conceptual accuracy with the bubble theory of all the different kinds. Maybe, but I doubt it. I don't know. I don't have any, I leave it outside of my conjectures. But I limit to what the Urantia book talks about, which is the eternal universes and the time-space space. So that's how far I go with the multiverse theory. Although, Rob has some other theories he wants to add to that, and that's great. We talked about deity experience. So deity would experience the creation level on this level of reality. What is it? 7 or 3 levels of reality. We have finite, aptonite, and absolute levels of reality. Then we have, let me just leave it there. So these are all 3 different ways that God can do the same thing in each realm, having experiences that can be added to the supreme being, the ultimacy of supremacy, whatever. And then, yeah. And then if you notice, this is where the Urantia book, it just loses me completely when we get into the Trinity of Trinities. But when it speaks about the Trinity of Trinities, it even says we don't even know what that's about. Because how can eternity ever be complete? You said eternity complete. Eternity can never be complete. Even the finite realm can never be complete, because in my theory, the cyclical theory means that even the finite goes on forever. It is just what deity does. And we are probably like, I don't know, ants in terms of how far creation can advance. We're just, we're like the cavemen of the world. And maybe the next cycle, they come into it. They are born with certain kind of knowledge and different, maybe there's going to be a 4th kind of brain or something, who knows? But the point is that there is so much that deity can experience, and it's not limited to just what he created. He also has the opportunity for what he eventuated. And he also has possibility for what has always been. And maybe, it says that the Havonas do learn from us, so they are growing, right? So eternity can grow as well. And that's what I mean when I say that experience is the engine of eternity. Let's see if I get
It's
your
looking
question.
at eternity as being the completion of a time-space creation.
Say it again.
At the ultimate levels, time space may not be existent. There's much more of God than just time space, much
Yes.
more. But we can reach the completion of it. Even the book talks about they're not sure what happens at the far edges of ultimacy. Can we really jump into absolute where we have completed all that, it is finished, it is complete in that aspect? I think it's probably complete from a deity aspect of the completion is deity has been achieved and that moves forward. That
I
may be
think it
the
completes in
completion.
cycles. I think completes in cycles, but not completes in the term of completion. And I don't think that us as created beings will ever be transcendentalists, will never be absentiters, because we can't deny the fact that we were created. No matter how far we go, we still had a beginning, right? So we'll never be absentiters or absoluters, but we can achieve something better, which is what they were saying, by our experiences coming from the lowest level of intelligence and making it up to seventh stage spirits. I think we're in a superior position, although we won't have the same kinds of experiences because we'll never be transcendentalists. We have a beginning, it's just who we are. But anyway, this has been great. I'm glad to know, Rob, that you and I can have these conversations. So we might be talking again.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. These are really great questions, and there's so many different ways to think about it. This idea that whether you call it completion or like exhaustion, like everything that needs to be done has to be done. And that's what I think is driving people on the, whether they realize it or not, on the multiverse theory and a lot of this discussion too. Like, yeah, and I think you think about different levels, like why are there 7 trillion planets? Like, okay, you need to have this experiential realm. Why not just have one? Or why have 1 trillion? Or why have 700,000? Why do you have 7 trillion? Well, there must be something that it will be exhausted by going through the 7 trillion variations and possibilities, right? And why do you need all these people? Why couldn't you do it with a smaller number? Why didn't you do it with twice as many? So at each turn you have this. There's something. There must be some purpose behind the quantity or the scope or the cycle, and it is. Well, like I say, the people who gave us the book can't put it together, right? They are still struggling with these things, so it's pretty mind blowing.
And know though, it talks about the Trinity, and there's 7 powers, so that would explain the
Right.
7 super
That's why
universes.
it's 7,
Wait,
but why aren't there just 7 planets then? Why are there no 7 super universes? Why do they all have to be so big? Why do you need 100,000 local universes? Why not have 200,000 or 49 100,000, right? It's
I kind of touch on that in book 1.
damn.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. And they tell us the outer space levels are much bigger, right? So it could be 7 and then 49 and then whatever times 7 and then times 7. Yeah. Okay, Robert, you've been waiting a while. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Zshonette. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So all these numbers of planets that are just astronomical bring me closer to God in this way. If you think of one individual that you know in your life who's gone through trials and tribulations and moved out on the other side of that and succeeded and built their personality and have come closer to God, the sublimity of that person's experience is really awesome for me. And when I imagine all the individuals in the local universe reaching perfection, going through those experiences and becoming brilliant beings, that's an incredible achievement. Now, when I imagine all the planets, these 7 trillion planets we were just talking about, and all the individuals on those planets reaching that completion in paradise, this is a huge amount. It's on an inexplicable amount of wisdom. Now, when we're talking about working outside of time, which is where God lives, and the cyclical nature of the universe, God, in my mind, has already experienced that wisdom of all those individuals from the entire universe and incorporated that into his very nature. And this is why I say this makes God more approachable for me, because it's not just a perfect being out there who's just started that way, but this God has the experience of the entire universe, hard-earned, scratched every inch of the way in his being, and we've been embraced in that love. So I think in that way, God can relate to each of us throughout the universe, and it makes God more relatable to me because he's like each of you who is struggling to live through all this and has lived through it. Does that make any sense?
That's the beauty of God the sevenfold, right? You're talking about the supreme being having all those experiences. But now we know Deity Absolute is existential. It already knows all this stuff, but it hasn't experienced it. But it knows it. But it's supreme being in our level toward perfection that makes us have that kind of connection, that love, because he's experienced all of this as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
I agree.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Allison.
There's so much to say. It's hard to even start talking about one thing because it just goes to another, to another, to another. It's so deep, but I agree with having to personalize in order to have a vast understanding of so many things. It is I think in my own personal, you have to personalize it because then things start getting added to.
Yes.
Like, right. Like Jesus, I and the Father are one. So everything that Jesus' mental dimensions and spiritual dimensions went through many, many, many incarnations, allowed the physical being at that time to say, we're one. And everybody has a journey to that oneness, which I believe explains everything. Like my adventure was through Egypt. Joni, I've told you about that.
Sure.
And that's how I was able to understand and open up so much more that I would have never known if I didn't personalize it. You see,
that's what I mean when I say that it has to change the way we think in some kind of way. It can't just be adding to our knowledge base. It's got to be more than that.
Exactly. And there's so much out there to learn that some people are like, where do I start? I mean, I think Edgar Casey's a wonderful way to start for people to understand the different dimensions of the universe and where we also introduces reincarnation and karma.
Well, I kind of ascribe to the Urantia book concept.
Right.
And I sort of, because I consider myself sort of a proponent or an evangelist for the Urantia book, I kind of limit the scope of what I promote to what the Urantia book says, because there are people promoting other writings, other locations. I happen to be a Urantia girl.
Well, me too. And in fact, this is what I was going to share with you, because I would get the Urantia quote every day in my email, right? Quote of the day. All right. So I would decode and interpret that throughout the text, but also the number of that particular quote, which I would connect to other biblical quotes or Egyptian tunes, queen, king of the valley, Theban tunes, whatever the case may be, which would open me more and more up to ancient Egypt, Atlanta, Lemuria, and also open me more up to the understanding of the Urantia book and its quotes, because I'm making it personal.
Sure. I think that's how you have to do. You have to make it personal, otherwise not changing you. That's my point. Yeah.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. Whether we talk about making it personal, obviously, maybe it's somebody's scientific questions or curiosity. Maybe it's somebody's religious upbringing or feelings or tradition, right? Or it's, some other way of thinking or way of interacting with the universe. Everyone has to make it reconcile. And that's the great thing about the book, because it speaks to so many different people. Yeah. Like, I think it's here to sneak religion into the people who think they're scientific, and it's here to make a little scientific to people who are just focused on the religion part. And it does
Make us
both, right?
complete.
So
It makes us
yeah,
complete because we have a little bit of hand in everything.
exactly. Sue.
My first question has to do with the AI platforms. There's so many, and I wonder which, in your experience, has turned out to be the most reliable and useful of all of them. What's your favorite?
That's an interesting question. It isn't the platform, it's the user really that determines the quality of what you get out of it. But certain platforms are geared toward a different aspect. For example, I use Claude a lot and Lexis for my legal work. I use chat for casual questions. I might hop over to Copilot for some conversations. I might go to Grok, that's about as far as I've got. Oh, Perplexity is also pretty good for legal as well. So they are all kind of geared toward, or they're more advantageous for different kinds of projects. So I just kind of go through as many as I can. In fact, for example, in my law practice, I will write I'll write let's say a factual scenario. I'll put it in there into AI, and then I'll have AI give me my causes of action, whatever. Then I'll go over to Lexis to get some really good case citations because Lexis doesn't hallucinate as much as the other AI programs do. And then I'll have it draft me an argument. And then I'll take that argument over to chat and say, what do you think about this argument? And I'll tell chat I'm the other side, right? And it'll tear down the argument. Then I'll go over to Copilot. I just play with them all. But it all has to do with what I am putting into it. And because if you leave AI uncorralled, unchecked, no telling what you're going to get out of it. You may get nothing of real value, but you have to engage it the way you would engage, let's say, a trainee, right? Or a mentee. And it's a smart mentee, but it doesn't have the experience and the knowledge that you have. So you have to kind of train it and coach it and know what kind of questions to ask. And one thing that's really important to spiritual people is to understand that you're not dealing with a personality. This is an example of what the Urantia book calls non-personal intelligence.
I totally appreciate what you're saying. The reason I'm asking is I've used the same prompt in multiple AIs and gotten very different returns.
Yeah.
I mean, the exact same user expression.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wondered, when you actually were generating the conversations that became the basis of your books, which did you find to be the most useful?
In my books, I use Claude and I use Copilot for my books. Because what happens, the more you engage AI, the more they learn the way you think. And they're able to present you with an output that's more consistent with what you're looking for. You get better responses the more you engage. That's my experience. And it also, you have to watch out because it will learn you and then start placating you, patting you on the head and telling you what you need to hear. So you have to always be challenging this this non-personal intelligence.
Yeah.
So
Tim,
I wouldn't take it to just accept it for what it is. You have to engage it.
Yeah, I appreciate the cautions. Well, the seat at the table, have you thought of inviting, this is my second question, the scientists that are the cyclicalists to some kind of think tank or event or conference or brainstorm where all of you could share theories and possibly, publicly let us all listen to that?
Well, see,
panel?
that's what I was hoping I'd find here because I'm not a scientist. It's not my field. I don't operate in that field. But maybe
those cycle people that wrote the books that you listed in one of your slides. I don't even know if they're all still alive.
I don't know either. I mean, it's not my field. I'm just saying that it's not my theory isn't that unusual. It's been something that's been considered for some time in the scientific community. But I wish that those of us, the Urantia book readers, who do have a foot in the scientific community, would consider something like that. I would be no one of consequence to a scientific, circle. Oh, she's just an attorney. Oh, she's just a mother. I just don't have that those creds. But I want to encourage real scientists to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just because you don't have the creds doesn't mean that they wouldn't be enlightened by some new
It's
input.
possible, but the academia, they're pretty strict in what they accept. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's a good idea for a topic for a science symposium in the future, though, sort of the creation or a big scale cosmology. Yeah.
There's a quote in one of the papers that talks about the next age will be focused on quality of thinking. It's we struggle for existence, and next will be a standard of living, and finally we struggle or strive for quality of thinking. And I think this kind of presentation leans us into that future. I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated it. I appreciate the logic that you apply to these things and how you do it on the Christ experiment with seek, ask, knock. I mean, the logic really holds, and it's just tremendous.